Hi, welcome to Esther's Laguna Woods Show, where every guest matters. Today we have two special guests, a mother and a son, Wilma Quigley and Jim Quigley. Hi. Hi, Jim and Wilma.
Hello, Esther. It's good to meet you.
Hello, Esther. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, so how are you feeling today?
Nervous.
Nervous. You don't have to be nervous.
Esther, at 102, this is the first privilege that I've ever had to speak before such a large audience, for goodness sake. And I hope it all goes well. You're free to edit any of this, you know.
Yes. Okay, so you're feeling okay. So my audience want to know, what kind of diet are you on? Diet.
What kind of diet are you on?
Oh, just a regular diet, whatever, the soup, salad, you know, vegetables, meat, whatever they have prepared. I'm in this retirement home called the Meridian in Laguna Woods, near my son and his wife, and it's been a real transition. I guess this is the age of transitions for everybody in this country, apparently.
Yeah,
just by way of background, we just moved her here. She had been living in Ohio and Indiana for many, many years. And
all her life, maybe, no?
Yeah, and only recently did we move her out here to California.
I came to California to get warm, and we've had a cold spell. It's going to warm up, though. So
it's a nice day today.
Very nice.
So let's see. We want to know your secret. You're 102. You were born in 1918 with the pandemic. We're going to talk about that later. What is your secret to longevity?
What is your secret to longevity?
Well, for one thing, I had parents. My father died at 92, and he was never in a hospital a day in his life. His father was a country doctor, and of course, his mother was only 15 years old when she married the doctor. However, they had healthy life, and my parents had a healthy life. So I guess I owe to good genes.
Did you drink like a lot of water or anything like that? Did you have a special routine? Did you do exercise?
Did you do a special routine? Was there special water or exercise?
Well, in high school, I was a member, of course, of the athletic group and got a letter from high school. But so I've been active all my life, and I guess I'm just trying to stay as active as I can be at this day and age, though, with my bad hearing, my bad eyesight. I'm trying to cope with this new transition into California. And I want to thank Susan and Jim. They have made my transition wonderful because they do everything to make my life a privilege here. And they're both beautiful people.
You were born in 1918.
Yes, and I was 2 days
when the pandemic was going on.
Yes,
right?
It was the Spanish flu.
The Spanish flu. So I know you were born then, but like in your teenage years, did they talk about it, about the pandemic? I mean,
in your teenage years, do you remember people talking about the pandemic?
No, I don't. It was something that came and gone, and I guess no one wanted to remember it.
Okay. Okay.
As a matter of fact, though, my doctor who delivered me was so busy at that time that he never had time in order to make out a birth certificate for me. So I did not get a birth certificate, mind you, until I was 101 years old, due to my daughter who wanted to make who wanted to join the Daughters of the American Revolution, but she needed some historical background. And that's when we got involved in all of that. And I finally got my birth certificate at 101.
Unbelievable. So you were born in November, right?
You were born in
Did
November.
you just have your birthday?
Yes, November 9, 2 days old when the armistice was signed for the First World War.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you remember the Depression in 1929?
The Depression, 1929. What do you remember about the Depression?
Well, of course, my father had fortunately to have a job, but my mother finally had to take in some boarders in order to make, to try and exist, because we would watch people coming down the street on their way just to get an apple. It was really a horrible time.
Wow.
For everybody.
So you had people coming to your place, to your home. You had people coming, and you were feeding them.
Yes, I did mention to Esther how your father had the good fortune of still being employed during the
Your
Depression.
husband, you mean? Your husband, or
Well, no,
father?
my mother's father. My mother's father was employed during the Depression. So
Yeah.
people would come by and beg for food, and your mother would feed them. You
Oh,
recall?
nice.
Yes. And I don't know if I contacted a disease from anyone who was passing through, because they usually came off the train. And so I had a terrible disease that no one seemed to know anything about, including my Uncle Stanley, who was studying to be a doctor. And I had pink spots all over my body, and they had no idea. And I kept wondering if you called that the Rocky Mountain spotted fever. I have no idea, but I managed to live through that one. And, I lived through a lot of history, that's for sure.
Yes.
Got the vote in 1920. And imagine, there are some people to this day who think that voting is not a privilege and a duty, but something they have to go through. And I get very upset with friends who feel that they cannot vote for this person or that person. I said, but you have to vote. You have a voice. Please use it.
Yeah, you were involved with the civil rights movement. Were you?
She was asking about the civil rights movement, how you were involved with the civil rights movement.
Well, I was only involved on my husband's coattails. He was the one who was deeply involved. And where we lived in the 1950 in Haverstraw, New York, he came up with the point that he tried to get the ice cream bill promoted. And that was the one back in that day and age that banks were redlining anyone that wasn't white. And so he said people should be able to live wherever they can afford to live in this country. And that went over like a lead balloon around that town. And so there was a time when he was called too liberal. But to me, his spirit of trying to make life better for everybody in the community and around has always been his force.
Wow. So he was with Martin Luther King.
Well, yeah, I had mentioned that Dad had one time met Martin Luther King. It wasn't as though he was working with Martin Luther King, but he did meet him one time. However, he was frequently out on the protest marches and the voter registration drives. You'll recall when he went down south to Mississippi and Alabama on the voter registration drives.
That was also a very interesting time for him. And he went down with a Baptist minister and Rabbi Lillyveld from the Cleveland.
Yeah.
And some white thug hit him over the head with a tire iron. And fortunately, he wound up in the hospital. I mean, he was unfortunate to wind up in the hospital briefly. My husband, fortunately, came through that okay, but it was a terrible time, and the time that
You're thinking of, you were referring to a Rabbi Lillyveld who was beaten with a tire iron.
yes.
Yeah,
So
this
the
was
rabbi
a
was
key
beaten.
one.
The rabbi was beaten, not
Yeah.
your husband.
My father was with Rabbi Lillyveld and a number of other clergymen, but then on that day they advised Rabbi Lillyveld that the Ku Klux Klan had threatened to be out there, and
Yeah.
the rest of them decided not to go to the protest. But it was Rabbi Lillyveld who insisted that he was going to go, and it was he who paid that price that day.
Wow. Mm. Always
You
been
know,
like that.
I've heard a lot about discrimination against blacks and I always thought, well, you know, whites, I'm afraid, have a majority point of view as a minority in this country. And so I just don't understand the attitudes, apparently, of people who have all this racial hatred. It's very, very disturbing.
When are people gonna realize that we are all the same?
You know, when
We are all the same.
That's the question, Esther.
Yeah.
Did
Okay, so, and then,
when are we going to realize that people are all the same?
Of course, we all have the same ambitions and hope for our children and our life.
this feelings, we all have feelings, we all bleed the same way. We're all the same.
Yes, we are. You
All
know,
the same.
I have had I was never trained to higher education, but I have had many, many different kinds of jobs in my lifetime. And one of the interesting was out in California. I worked for carpet people who sold carpet. And one day I went to work and there was no one there. And I said, where is everybody? And they said, well, the authorities came and took them all back to Mexico. So then Governor Brown at that particular time had some kind of bill going that would require that people have a green card in order to come to work in this country. And that took years, of course, to develop. So I guess we're still in trying to transfer to this new generation as I am.
I think, and she's referring to the first Governor Brown.
Yes, the father.
And
yeah, okay.
Also, you'll remember how the Ethical Society of Los Angeles was part of the organizing the food collections when the United Farm Workers, Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers were organizing, and they would organize these caravans that would take food up to the farm workers who were striking. And that was one of the things you and Dad were involved in back then as well.
Well, one summer, my husband in the South also was running a program for the children, summer program for children that were, well, I think of it in a minute. Anyway, deprived, I suppose you would say. And I went down to join them, and they had a picnic, and I was sitting on a blanket with some family, and the lady said to me, this is the first time I've ever had a conversation with a white person. And I was absolutely amazed. And then Harold and I went to a restaurant next to the hotel, and we were ordered, and people would come and go. This was completely Black community. And people would come and go and eat their breakfast and get up and leave. And I said, Harold, I said, we're not going to be served. Apparently, they are not going to serve us. And so he said, well, he asked for his check, which was coffee, I guess. And so they said, oh, your breakfast is ready. And finally, we got a breakfast. So I said to Harold, now you pay a tip for service. And he said, Wilma, these people have been discriminated against all their lives. Of course, I'm going to tip.
Wow, she's crying? Wow.
Yeah, it's just remembering that.
It was so humiliating to be discriminated against.
And yet, with my father observing that this is now you know what it feels like. That was his view. His view was, well, now you know what it feels like.
Absolutely.
And so he didn't take offense. He didn't take offense. He realized that this, as she just said, this is what these folks have had to put up with all their lives.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. And I guess some of this is still happening through this country, and it's a dreadful, dreadful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you went to school, there were no cars, there were horses. How did you get to school when you were little?
I think that would be the time of her mother. Actually, she was saying when you went to school, there were no cars. Everybody was riding on horses. I think I had referred to your mother having to get to school on horseback. I think by the time she was going to school, in fact, tell her about that embarrassing experience of being in your father's old car.
My father had a 1918 Model T Ford, and so I only went for a ride in the car on a Sunday afternoon. He babied that thing. And so, however, if you've had the experience of sitting in a Model T Ford, you sit up high in the back seat and the front seat, and there's no way you can scoot under the seat in order to hide. And we pull up at the stoplight, and I pray that we get the green light, because they're always had to pass by an orange drugstore where a lot of the young people hung out, and they'd say, oh, look at that car. And I tried to hide, no place to hide. And then later, I had hoped that we could have that old car and drive around in it, but she had given it to the Museum of Henry Ford.
Wow.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. He donated that car to the Ford Museum. I didn't know that.
He doesn't know. He didn't know that. That's funny. Okay, so let's see. When you wanted to go to the movies, how much did it cost?
How much did it cost when you went to the movies?
Oh, 25 cents.
25
However, you know, my father worked 50 years for Van Camp Hard and Iron Company, was never, ever given a pension. He had to retire without money. And of course, thank goodness for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who came along with Social Security and other advantages for people who are in the working class. And now then, we're going through the same situation in this day and age, trying to do things for the working poor.
Ah. Now let's talk about Pearl Harbor, 1941.
Pearl Harbor.
Do you remember anything with Pearl Harbor?
Do you remember Pearl Harbor? Do you remember the news about Pearl Harbor? Where were you?
Where were you?
Well, we were living in Roachdale, Indiana, and it was a terrible, terrible news. And so I just remember the time, and all the young men, of course, were required for service. I had two brothers who were Marines. One was in the Pacific and one was in Korea. And fortunately, they both came back. And so we were very grateful for that.
So you had like different jobs, huh? You have different
Oh,
jobs.
yes. I've had secretarial jobs, and I've had clerical jobs, and I worked in 3 different hospitals in Central Supply, and that was very, very interesting. And I just kind of fell into those jobs. And then I worked for an OBGYN man, as I wasn't a nurse, but I clerked for him, and that was very interesting also. And I learned a lot about the medical field in that day and age. And so all of them have been, had their highlights.
I'm going to add this, Esther, that
Yeah.
my mother had said earlier that she never earned any college degrees. But
Yeah.
in her lifetime, she has read hundreds, possibly thousands of books. She has used her public library throughout her life, and her children have provided her many books. Her family has provided many books. So she's probably got the equivalent of postgraduate degrees with all of the books that she's read over the years.
Yeah.
Well, she sounds very intelligent.
I doubt
She
that.
sounds very intelligent.
My children are still trying to get me into this century, because I think I'm still living in the 18th. I cannot get over the high tech, and they're hard to cope with. My children Susan and Jim just gave me a wonderful gift called Alexa. And
Oh, you have Alexa.
so
And you
I asked
talk to them.
Alexa all kinds of things. Some she can't answer and some she can. But it's just a fascinating day and age with a high-tech everything. I don't even have a cell phone, for one thing. I can't see it. Oh, and by the way, I have talking books now, which are my blessing, because that's the way I hear very well. And
How many kids do you have?
How many kids do you have?
And grandkids?
5 wonderful children, and 9 grandchildren, and 9 great-grandchildren. I'm proud of every one of them. They're all thriving and doing well, and they're very fortunate.
Well, Jim is a very smart guy.
Lucky guy. Lucky. That's very lucky. Very lucky. Very lucky.
Just going back to the movies, did you have any special movie star that you liked then?
Well, of course, I'm used to the old Betty Davis and Barbara Stanwyck.
Oh, Barbara Stanwyck.
And so the new ones, of course, are all very interesting. And I particularly am fond of the British. I like their films. They're more realistic and more down to earth, I think, than a lot of ours. But
which one was your favorite movie then, years ago?
Is there a favorite movie? She'd like to know if there's a favorite title that you've seen or favorite?
Well, there's a wonderful film called Keeping Mum, and that's British. And
a comedy, very funny.
Yeah.
Ah, wow, that's interesting. So my last question is, how is Pebbles from Flintstones? From the Flintstones.
Oh,
how is Pebbles?
How is Pebbles? I don't know if you're aware of this, but one of the TV cartoon characters. There are very few people who have the name Wilma. And Fred Flintstone's wife is named Wilma. So,
right.
So Esther wants to know about the little child they had called Pebbles.
Oh, I have no idea. I'm sorry. I don't remember that one.
Well, we're running out of time. It was so nice having you here.
However, we had a lot of jingles that they used to sing on the children's programs. And going away on our vacation.
Yeah.
You sing that
Yeah,
one.
yeah. There was look, she did raising 5 children with the early TV in the 1950s. Kukla, Fran, and Ollie were a favorite.
Ah,
Riley the
okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
You're welcome, Esther. Thank you.
Esther, I want to tell you, I much appreciated very much your talking with me, and I feel very honored and privileged. This is the first time in my life I've ever had anything like this happen to me. And as I say, you're welcome to delete anything.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Esther.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching. And next time we'll have another interesting guest. Thank you. Bye.